Hello YouTube, Alex Van Ham here with another Freebird Media live stream. Thank you for joining me this evening. Tonight it is Tuesday, February 26, 2019, and once again I have the pleasure of speaking with K.M. Breakey, a writer, a fiction writer from the West Coast. I've interviewed him before, and I'm happy to talk to him tonight about his newest book, All Thy Sons. So, sir, thank you for joining me tonight.
It's great to be with you, Alex.
So you've got this new book out, and I took a look at it. I really enjoyed reading it, and I guess you could say it's a dystopian thriller novel, kind of about a possible
political.
future.
I call it political fiction, but there's definitely dystopia involved in this one. Unlike my previous two, to be honest.
Right, and it's I guess partly metafiction because it starts off, of course, in the 70s. And sort of works its way up to into the possible future, and it's definitely something that I could see being controversial because it deals with a lot of really important subjects in Canadian culture and what we call the culture wars, including racial issues and multiculturalism and stuff like that. So I guess the first thing that I want to ask you about is you started the book off with a quote. From another person, I hope you don't mind me reading it. You said, "Civilizations die from suicide, not by murder." Arnold J. Toneby. So that quote, why did you choose to open it with that? Is that sort of sum up your main thesis of the story?
I like that quote. And here's something interesting: is you got a pre-release. You got a pre-release, and in the actual production edition that went out, that's it. I've replaced it with a different quote. There's a Robert A. Heinlein quote, which is significantly longer. But that quote stuck with me. I read that and I had a few quotes kind of prepared and ready to go. But suicide seems to be the order of the day here for Western civilization, be it Canada, be it Australia, U.S., Western Europe, South Africa. We all seem to be going in the same direction. There's many, many forces at play as to why it's happening, but there seems to be a simultaneous headlong nosedive into the gutter where we're all going, and it's pretty much obvious to anyone watching. But obviously, mainstream media and pop culture will attack anyone that criticizes the directions we're going, and call you every name in the book and tell you, by the way, everything's perfect. If we could just get more of this, and this, all the things that are sledgehammers to Western civilization. So yeah, we're in a tough spot, and I did like that quote.
Absolutely agree with you there. I think you do a really good job throughout the story highlighting a realistic, the actual current affairs going on in Canada. I like the way you mentioned different media platforms like Rebel Media because I think the state of mainstream media in Canada is a big part of the problem.
Should have mentioned Freebird Media. Sorry about that.
No problem. I don't think we should be considered mainstream, but one day.
No, you're not mainstream.
One day we'll get there. I hope. Sort of. We'll replace the mainstream. We'll build a better mainstream. And I like too because in your book, of course, you touched on a lot of realistic problems like Antifa. You have a chapter just titled Antifa, and so. You've probably seen, if you're, on our channel, we've got a lot of videos of Antifa actually causing ruckuses at buildings and stuff. Yeah. And so you can see how that would, when I see that video footage, it always makes me think of like a dystopian future. So I imagine that probably, you probably have had similar inspiration from seeing that kind of content, the beat downs of the MAGA hat wearers and so on.
Oh yeah, every day, and no one covers it. And, unlike a guy like you, and Faith Goldie, for example, I've seen you working with her and getting out into the mean streets and situations that are border. I write books. I do this in a fictional world, and I'm not out there putting my safety at risk. So but I've seen enough video, and I've seen what's happened to even you guys. Scary. Very scary. You don't want to walk around any American city with a MAGA hat even any Canadian city for that matter. I mean, there was a story, restaurant in Stanley Park. This was about 6 months ago. I remember following it at the time, and a guy was refused service at Prospect Point restaurant because he wore a MAGA hat, and there was a big to-do. I think the waiter actually got fired, but there was an uproar. Yeah, Antifa. It's I don't really understand it. I don't know where it comes from. It seemed to swell up out of nothing. And it doesn't feel organic. It feels contrived, and there's a puppet master somewhere. I have to assume pulling all these strings and making all this happen and funding it. I mean, I could throw some names out. The one name we hear over and over, you know who I'm talking about.
The George man.
So I don't know, but that was a fun one to write. That particular chapter, only because. Ultimately, the Antifa took a little beat down. Not to do a spoiler alert here in the interview, but the tables were turned a little bit. So you get a little revenge here and there in the fictional world. You might as well do it, right? It's enjoyable.
Absolutely. I gotta say, I definitely absolutely appreciate what you're doing, because I don't know anyone else currently that's realistically talking about these issues, and so my hat is off to you for that, because you're literally the only Canadian author I know of that's literally talking about this.
There's many that are talking about the issues, yourself included, and north and south of the border. Where there's many. I hate the term alt-right. I hate all the terms.
I understand.
Whatever.
I understand.
But you're right, in that pop culture and fiction and novels of fiction. I mean, I don't know of anyone else doing this. It's a niche, and I didn't start out doing this. I have 2 books that were completely speculative fiction, nothing to do with fighting back against a liberal world that's gone completely berserk and is trying to destroy everything in its path. My first 2 novels had nothing to do with this. I had a few red pill moments along the way. Probably had a few even well before that, but they didn't sink in. They didn't cause me to make any changes. But my eyes were opened, and then I saw an opportunity, and I said, you know what? I have to do this. Why would I not do this? And that was the release of Johnny and Jamal. That was mid-2016. And that was, at the height of, the fallout from, obviously Obama was still president, hands up, don't shoot, false narrative, and black-white issue of America is just, black-on-white violence. I don't hear you talking about it a lot. It's not your niche topic, but you and I have talked privately. I know you're well aware of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Your family is from Detroit initially?
Yeah, absolutely. My father's side was displaced as part of the white flight in the late 60s. So definitely understand that aspect of it. And, I think that there's, like you, I don't like certain terms either. They're limiting, but there's nobody, even just generally speaking on the right, in pop culture and in writing that writes about this stuff. And I think that one of my revelations over the last 2 years about doing Freebird is I'm trying to do objective news and commentary, and but what Donald Trump I think understood that no Republicans before him did was that the pop culture arena is probably more important than the actual political arena, I think that
especially with social media.
Absolutely, and there's so many novels out there that are beloved novels that are good works of art, but they usually are always on the left when you think about things like To Kill a Mockingbird and stuff. And what we need is someone that actually has the courage to write about what you're writing about from a realistic sort of non-radical left perspective, and that's a good way to participate in the culture war. So that's why I'm really excited to speak to you tonight, because if I discover other writers doing this as well, of course I'll try to talk to them. But right now you're the only person I know of brave enough to do this, and I know that. What I'm wondering also is, of course, if these are quite hot topics, so people must be critical of you, and I'm sure if they wanted to, they could come after you pretty hard. So have you dealt with a lot of, how bad has the blowback been is what I'm wondering?
You know what, it hasn't been too bad. I mean, I guess I'm flying a little bit under the radar, but one of my taglines, I'm not sure if this was in a note to the reader, the author's notes at the end of the version that you got, but ultimately, Alex, I'm an observer. I'm an observer, and I reflect what I see and put it into a fictional sense, and I tell a story through characters. Without characters, without character development, you got nothing. So my tagline is I cannot be held responsible for what my characters say or do. So I'm just describing life as my characters see it, and I let them take me through, and react how I believe sane people would react. So, I've definitely had some attack reviews. My thing too, Alex, is I write under my own name.
Right.
I obviously use my initials, but I'm not hiding. This is just I'm just describing life as I see it in a fictional sense, as I just said. So let's bring it on. If I can start a discussion, then great. Another one of my lines is, I'm not so arrogant to think that I could stop the demise and the decline of the Western world through my fiction. It'd be nice if I could help, but if I can't stop it, at least I can do is document it. At least I can do is describe it, and show that this is how I'm feeling. I'm interested to see 10 years from now. I'll look back on some of this work. And by the way, I continue. I plan to. Who knows what will happen in the future? But I do plan to continue releasing new novels. Hopefully, one per year. I'm already at work on my next novel because, like I said, every Western corner of the Western world is being attacked and degraded and defiled and destroyed, and all slightly different with slightly different flavor. But ultimately, we're all going in the same direction. My previous novel, previous to All Thy Sons, Never, Never, Never Again, set in South Africa. I don't have to tell you, South Africa is a prism into the future. It's a glimpse into the future. Possibly, that's what a lot of people say. They're well down the road of whites to bring up race for the first time in our discussion. Whites are they're in grave danger. Every last one of them is in grave danger, and they're being picked off, they're being killed, they're being tortured, they are being excluded politically, they're being excluded from commerce, from the employment market, and they're just clinging. And there's a few different types of resistance welling up. And there's a few bits of international support. You see that a little bit in Australia. The infamous Trump tweet. If you follow South Africa, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Hey, I say to Donald Trump, what happened to that? That was like 6-7 months ago. Pompeo was supposed to be investigating. But to get back to your original question, blowback. Other than critical reviews, I'm fine. I also figure if you bring enough rationality to a discussion. Here's a bit of me being naive. If you bring enough rationality, how can they possibly attack you? I know that's naive. But again, I'm doing this in a fictional sense. Don't attack me. Attack my characters. Come after my characters. Right. That's my defense. Well, I'm writing books of fiction. Final point, and we'll move on. You don't attack Stephen King because he brings absolute psychotic characters that kill multiple people, or he's not labeled. And by the way, I love Stephen King, but he's yet another insane lefty that.
Right. I was going to bring him up actually.
I used to be a fan of Jim Carrey as well, and he's they've just gone so far to the left. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely true. It's funny because I was going to bring that up because it felt like a little bit Stephen King-y in some parts, like just in the tone it was building. And then I was going to ask you if you were influenced by him because, of course, he has seemed to have gone off the deep end in terms of his bizarre left-wing rants. And I don't know if he's just trying to sell books and stay relevant by trashing, or what.
I have no idea. I have to assume people like Jim Carrey, people like Stephen King, other pop culture. We saw the Academy Awards. I've tortured myself and watched a little bit of it, not all of it. But they are just so insulated from the man on the street. Diversity is strength. Diversity is strength. It is a mantra that's drilled and drilled and drilled and drilled into all of us. And the reality is, it seems to be that diversity is if anything, it's a glaring weakness, and it's not only a weakness, it's a great danger to the cohesion of a society. You go from high trust, high cooperation to little competing cliques. You probably followed the election, the by-election in Burnaby South. Not 10 minutes away from where I'm sitting right now. And Jagmeet Singh, obviously he won, but the drama there with the two, the Asian and the East Indian, and they were at each other in the press, and the Chinese candidate actually went out and said to her constituents in an Chinese language newspaper, "Hey, vote for me. I'm Chinese. Don't vote for him. He's Indian." I mean, identity politics is not a threat. I mean, it's a reality.
Absolutely.
And the only group that's not pushing any form of identity politics, again, to be racial, is whites. Whites are not allowed to advocate for their own group in any way, shape, or form. It's always about the collective. You can criticize groups. That seems to be fair game. We're now able to criticize other groups for participating in identity politics. But if I believe everything I've read, and it doesn't seem like in a multicultural society, it seems like identity politics is the ultimate conclusion. No matter what you do, people always go into tribes.
Absolutely. I found that example with the liberal candidates there fascinating, because the woman just came right out and said it, vote for me, I'm Asian. And it just highlight like that. That was between, South Asians and Asians. So that had nothing to do with white people. And they're clearly very bluntly, like just overtly, bluntly thinking along those lines. And yet they're the only ones who can't even think that way are whites. And we naturally, in this culture don't think that way either. So, and then, of course, we have a whole movement, with Jordan Peterson and other types like that, discouraging that we think that way. Meanwhile, everyone else is just exploiting us for basically not having
Jordan Peterson, and it's all about the individual and how you. I mean, there's a lot of merit in his message.
Sure.
But ultimately, you're still going to be defeated because there is still this group mentality that seems to be overtaking our society. And the individual, no matter how virtuous you are, Alex, and the way you carry yourself, you're still going to be a white male. You're still going to be a racist, xenophobe. You're going to have all the negative associations of a white male, no matter what you've done and what you continue to do in your life. You're trapped.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is a reprehensible state of affairs, by the way, for this country and culture. And so, again, we're two of us in different mediums, but both fighting the culture war with, with our real names. So my hats are off to you, because at least it's our form of, taking action, I think, is a very important step. I think you have a passage at the end of your book, a note to the reader, just basically asking them to get involved, sort of, because, Western civilization is deteriorating quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and my thought is, if people were to attack me and say, "Oh, you're trying to incite, race war," I'm saying, I'm doing exactly the opposite. I'm trying to prevent it, because that is the direction society is going. When you completely gloss over any of the friction and you say, let's bring in, to touch on a hot topic, a controversial topic, immigration. Let's bring them all in. Bring a million. I saw a tweet by Faith Goldie not just a few hours ago, and it was comparing immigration plans between, I forget, it was NDP, but also PPC. And they're not really that different. And her comment, her editorial comment on that, very insightful. We don't really have a choice. You can say, "Oh, I like this candidate, I like this." They're all pushing the same message.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, if you continue to bring in, I'm not the first to say this, and it's an ugly sentence. If you bring in the third world, you become the third world. And if so ultimately, another, diversity is strength is one mantra that's drilled into us. Another is, country is built by immigrants. Sure, I guess it's also built by settlers that actually built infrastructure and came here and got no form of welfare or anything of that nature. And it's a little bit different now. And we're at a point where we're bringing people in that there is not only no desire, no motivation to assimilate. There's no intention. There's absolutely nothing. It will be they will be completely isolated and will just continue to generate these cliques of society that ultimately will compete with each other, as described in my book.
Well, interesting, because that's true. And in your book, you talk about the subject of Islam and Islamic terrorism. And so I just want to tell you as well, we accept super chats on this channel. So Anaf Habib sends $5, and he says, "Just join the winning team, i.e. Islam. Once that is done, the whites can easily talk about group identity, race, etc. without much worry. Simple." How do you respond to that?
Interesting. Well, I mean, I do touch on Islam in the book. And ultimately, I sort of had a theme, and Islam was going to be demonized a little bit by some of the characters. You know, ultimately for some of the really negative aspects of Islam, because they're there, obviously. And I'm fearful of Islam. I'm very fearful of Islam. Sorry, I'm not in. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. I'm very fearful of Islam. So fearful, in fact, that I changed the tenor of the book a little bit to steer a little bit away. Islam is certainly discussed, but it's not the ultimate demon. I mean, and I kind of feel like this personally too. The ultimate demon is liberalism gone insane. Mm-hmm. It's leftism. So that is the ultimate demon. That's the ultimate enemy. So I'm kind of deflecting a little bit on the question. I realize that. Well, but I'm going to finish the thought and just say I heard someone, South African guy, Dan Root is his name. He's a very smart guy. I've not met him. But he said, listen, with the state of South Africa right now, one of the barriers to defending whites, collectively defending themselves, is not has nothing to do with blacks. It's other whites, the danger of other whites, mm-hmm. and shockingly, the liberals that we encounter in our daily lives among us here in Canada and the U.S., Western Europe, we kind of get that. We kind of see, and they live in their little bubbles, and they say these really nice things, and they sleep better at night, I suppose. They still exist. That mentality still exists in 2019 in South Africa, where if you step on the wrong street, I was going to say it late at night. It doesn't have to be late at night anymore. With white skin, you will be attacked. And by the way, the same is true in many American cities. I mean, you mentioned the white flight. White flight makes it sound like, whites, we don't want to be near black people, we're prejudiced. No, white flight is about, fleeing violence. Again, that's the point that you brought up. Mm-hmm. But just to make that clear, it's not, we don't want to be here, property values. No, violence is the thing that's feared. I mean, Colin Flaherty, Colin.
Mm-hmm. He wrote White Girl Bleed.
He is relentless in highlighting this astronomical level of black on white violence all over the States. He touches on other parts of the world as well, but he focuses on the States. It's a cancer eating alive the inner cities of America. I mean, it's and ironically, the exact opposite message is portrayed in the media. So yeah, there you go. I kind of deflected on Islam a little bit, but it is present in the book. But ultimately, I see leftism as the evil, the enemy.
Yeah.
It empowers everything. It enables everything.
I absolutely agree with you, and I don't think you were deflecting too much. I think that you hit on an important topic that, you have a fear of Islam. I have a lot of anxiety about Islam and what it's doing to the West, which is why we talk about it on this channel so much. Try to understand it better. Most people don't understand it. There's clearly problems between the East and the West, or between Islam and the West, that are not compatible. So I definitely understand having an anxiety about it, and most, the mainstream media completely misrepresent what's going on. To supplement everything you've been saying, I just wanted to point out, actually, and just to give a quick shout out, 2 weeks ago we published an article on freebirdmedia.ca by one of our staff writers, Maurice Porter, called "Disproportionate Overrepresentation, a Barrage of Red Pills." And if anyone wants to read the article, I put it in the chat here, but we basically show you how overrepresentation works in the media, and we show you how whites are underrepresented in many cases where, blacks and Muslims are overrepresented. We give statistics here. And in Canada and the U.S., that's absolutely true. Of course, for terrorism, they disproportionately make up the majority of terror attacks and so on. And this is just the kind of stuff that we have here. We also talk about Jewish influence in the media and black crime systems and stuff. But the mainstream doesn't talk about any of this stuff at all. So you're right. We're part of a small, I guess, niche of people that are even brave enough to talk about this subject. And of course, I'm sure you get the mislabel, the alt-right derogatory label thrown at you by the
sure. I like I said, I don't like the labels. Ultimately, if you're talking about race, what I really am is anti-white.
Right. Yes. Me too. That's a good way to say that.
So if I'm saying, hey guys, white farmers. By the way, it's not only white farmers; it's whites of any stripe, urban. You don't have to be on a farm to be attacked if you're white in South Africa. I'm just saying, guys, this is a big problem. And why is the media not focusing on it? Why we're sending troops, or I think America may be sending troops into Venezuela. Is it not time to send troops into South Africa?
Right.
This is a genocide. 100,000 whites have been slaughtered since 1994. It was so predictable, too.
Yeah, it was predictable.
Off on a bit of a South Africa rant here, but in 1994, literally, whites, through a deceptive referendum question, mind you, very deceptive, basically handed the keys to a first world country of the highest order that deteriorated somewhat to a pack of amateurs, the ANC, which wasn't even a political party. They were a terrorist organization, a pack of thugs. And Nelson Mandela obviously had this mantle that he, and presence, and a lot of good things can be said about Mandela. But who knew that in 25 years the country would be in the state it's in, which is complete. It's not only the black, white, and the violence. It's the infrastructure maintenance.
Sure.
There's going to be no water. By the way, water will be the new gold. Transportation, the trains in the Western Cape, they're getting burned out. You can't drive on the highways because there's potholes that are 2 feet deep. And by the way, if you happen to be white and break an axle in the middle of nowhere on your car, good luck to you.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's the issue of why is Canada not willing to accept any refugees that are white from South Africa? It's a weird situation going on. So that is the sad state of affairs that we were in 2019. And of course, looking into the future, not being too cynical, things don't look good at the moment. So
I did look into the future in the book, and there's a few silver linings but it's dystopian fiction. So do I think it's going to happen like that? Absolutely not. What it will be. The future and reality that we live in is always messy and ugly, and just civil war is just ultimately that seems to be the direction the U.S. is headed.
Yeah, well,
very very soon.
I suspect so as well, within a decade or so. But I don't want to give too much away about the story. But it also didn't seem like a hopeless ending to me. So would you say you're optimistic overall, or trying to be optimistic as possible?
Trying to be optimistic. This, the beauty of Western civilization and the freedoms, ultimately the freedoms that we have are a weakness which are being exploited to destroy Westerners. There's kind of some irony there. But, there's no denying, I do hear people on the right saying, if we didn't have all this crazy diversity, immigration, third world, imagine how far we'd be scientifically advanced if we didn't have, if our post-secondary education systems, our universities were not completely taken over by leftism, which they are.
Absolutely.
They are.
They're little cult factories now.
Affirmative action in math departments. It just doesn't work, right? So how far would we be ahead? So, yeah, I have optimism that ultimately good will come, but I have pessimism in that there's a lot of pain to be coming as well, unfortunately. And if, you're a little younger than me. I think about 20 years younger than me.
I'm in my 30s.
Pardon me?
So I am in my 30s, so I've been around long enough, not as long as you, but I'd love
Yeah,
to
no,
see
I'm not saying
change.
you're a kid. I'm not saying you're a kid at all. No, you've seen.
Enough that it's
But
changed a lot, even in my life.
pardon me?
Even in my short life, it's changed a lot, so I can imagine your extra perspective that it must
Well,
be
I mean,
very
I was
drastic.
born in the 60s. I mean, I wasn't really conscious until the 70s, but the 70s were very interesting because, I mean, that was the last, I mean, literally, everyone in my class, it was a white society. I mean, we had British roots in my part of the world. We had French and English roots, in the East. And then we did have like the Italians coming in. As you know, my main character is of Italian descent. Part of the reason I did that was to show that, yeah, there were some disparate groups coming in. And there were some growing pains, for sure. There was some conflict. But ultimately, the immigration up until the mid 70s in in Canada was European primarily. I don't have anything against Asians. I mean, our Asian population, many of them, as you well know, are very, very high functioning. I've count many friends of Asian descent. Ultimately, there seems to be a population replacement, and if I can lament that, I do lament that, and call me every name in the book for feeling that. I do. You look back and I go, wow, look at all those little blonde kids in my grade 2 class. That was pretty cute, and it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, of course, people try to guilt me because I don't feel obligated to bring in any immigrants who are non-white, personally, and I just think, well, whites are only 7% of the global population, and we're declining. So that right there in itself is a moral argument for why we should be allowed to just maintain our own, white-built nations, I guess. So, that's
ultimately you're bringing in people, and they don't. There's no embrace anymore of the host culture.
Right.
The host culture is like it's on the ropes. It's beaten to death. The host culture is last dying gasps, and there's absolutely no embrace of it by new immigrants. There's a desire to inflict. That's kind of a strong word, to impart their own cultures. And by the way, this culture is different from this culture, and they hate each other. And we saw a glimpse of that in Burnaby South. Like I said, every Western nation is a little bit different. Canada, we do have multiculturalism. It's fairly peaceful. You've told me about Toronto. I was born in Toronto. Been there many times. Don't hang out there much. Vancouver is it's a very safe city. Very safe city. A very multicultural city. But I can literally walk around anywhere, any time of day. I claim. I hope I'm not mistaken, and not that I'm out at 2 a.m. in the worst parts of town, but I'm not fearing for my life because I have white skin or for any reason. There's a drug problem, but there's very little in the way of violent crime. That's not true of London. That's not true of Toronto. From what you've told me, Jane and Finch. That's certainly not true of any American city where there's black population. Because the blacks, American blacks, they have just crime. This is a line from Colin Flaherty. Crime is the new entitlement for blacks. I mean, it's entitlement. It is an absolute way of life, and violent crime and the demonization of whites across the last 10 years. It's just an explosion. But having said that, I've talked to some other people that have been around on this planet longer than I have, and the white flight that started, in the 60s and 70s, black on white crime has always been a problem. Mm-hmm. So, maybe it's gotten worse now because, whites are being demonized so much, but, MAGA hat, you wear a MAGA hat, boy, oh boy, you're garbage and you deserve a beat down. There's a video doing the rounds on YouTube. I don't know if you saw that. Or not YouTube, Twitter.
I saw it. Yeah. Pretty disgusting. And people, the media twists it around so people don't really understand that. Yeah, the violence is very one-sided when you want to compare actual racial statistics.
No, the media is basically they're telling the opposite in every case.
And they're lying.
Literally the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. they are just boldly lying about the situation. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and again, I can testify that I know from my father's side of the family history that Detroit is a good example of balkanization
Mm-hmm.
among racial groups, leading to essentially a failed state situation, kind of.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
on that note, we actually have another super chat comment. Anam Habib sends $10 and says, "Racial tensions will balkanize the U.S. via the Second Civil War very soon, likely in the 2030s or 2040s. Should Canada support the white separatists vying for a homeland in the rubble when that happens?"
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's kind of the topic of the book. That's the topic of the book.
Yeah.
So I say to that guy, hey, buy my book, read my book, and you get my answer. But, one thing I said about 20 minutes ago is that every single group advocates for their own race or religion or whatever, with the exception of one group and one group alone, and that's whites. And not only do they not advocate, they're explicitly forbidden from advocating.
Right.
So basically, the start of any homeland, that sounds very far right. So I don't even like to entertain such ideas. But the start of that would be, at least beginning to advocate, accepting the fact that identity politics is the reality and it's never going to go away. The toothpaste is out of the tube. You cannot put it back in. There is multiracial, and there's never going to be a typical Canadian voting on issues. It's always voting, it's racial headcounts. So with that said, I mean, at least there should be some advocacy for people of European descent, I imagine. I don't know what an ugly civil war looks like in Canada. I think whatever happens in the States will kind of obviously influence us. We're always following the States no matter what. And our multiculturalism is vastly different from what they have in the States because they have such a large black population.
Mm-hmm. Of course. It's also interesting to note, too, that their black population is declining because they're being, in a sense, overtaken by the Mexican populations in many areas. And so,
yeah. As a percentage, it certainly is. I mean, the push from the Central American and Mexico and South, I mean, yeah. And that's not going to get any worse. I mean, Latin America is explored extensively in my book, and it's complete descent into anarchy and chaos. And, ultimately, what does that create? It creates refugees. And we're seeing it unfold in Venezuela. It's very tragic, very sad, and I mean, it's having a big impact on the States. And the Democrats, the hate Trump, the never Trumpers, the hate Trumpers. I mean, they're showing their true colors, are they not? I mean, their policies are so anti-American. So we're gonna do anything to defeat Trump, and if that involves completely destroying our country, burning everything down, which, by the way, that I think should be the Democrats' slogan: "Burn it down." They'll do it.
Yeah.
They will do it, and they are doing it. I mean, AOC with her Green New Deal replace every single building in the United States. I haven't heard this talked about enough, but can you imagine the fossil fuel consumption that would actually be required to destroy all those buildings and then rebuild them? And then they're all green, but by the way, you've consumed this much fossil fuels to do that exercise. Money aside. I mean, it's such a ridiculous plan. It's a plan built by a child who has a neat idea, and yet you have these established Democrats giving it the thumbs up and then saying, "What a great idea." It's evocative for me of what happened in South Africa, where you literally handed the keys over to people that were ill-equipped to run a first world country, and we see the results today, just 25 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and it's very alarming at how fast things can accelerate. When they're on the
it's accelerating, I think, too, unfortunately.
So, also speaking generally, too, broadly speaking, in the book, the characters, they feel very relatable to me, and one of the other subjects that you touched on that I like that made me relate to the characters is the subject of this sense of moral superiority that liberals tend to have, and how personal relationships become strained. So for me, that I've gone through this process already, and by now I don't have all the left wing friends I had are long gone from my life at this point. But
I still try to hold on to a few.
So that's what I was going to ask you. You still like how your personal life been affected a lot by in recent years by identity politics, or not too bad?
Not too bad. I mean, definitely. I try to avoid talking politics. I still do, and people know how I feel, but I kind of leave it alone. But yeah, I mean, again, whites are the worst because I can talk with I'm specifically thinking of one of my colleagues, an East Indian fellow, very smart. I mean, he's degrees, letters after his name like you can't believe. And this is going back a few years. East Indian fellow, great guy, a little younger than me, somewhere between you and me. And we're driving in Surrey, and this guy, he considers himself a libertarian. And we're driving in Surrey. We see East Indian, and he makes the comment. He goes, "Man, you white people, you're going to be in a museum someday." And so I kind of appreciate the fact that he didn't have to self-censor himself. He just said what was on his mind. For me, I kind of, well, how can you feel good about saying something like that? You're not allowed to say that. Imagine if a white person said that about a First Nations person. I mean, you just can't do it. But was I offended? No, I was like, wow, I wish I had the freedom to speak that freely. And not even think twice about it. It's again similar to that Asian candidate who felt no qualms about addressing her constituents in Chinese and saying, vote for me because I'm Chinese. She was probably shocked that would come back and bite her and actually, force her out of the race. But it's only whites that are so handcuffed. We're so constrained in what we can say that it seems like my theory is that people gravitate toward extreme leftism because at least it allows them to be passionate about something. And then it's passionate about hating other whites is what it is. Hating Trump, Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. So yeah, but yeah, I try to keep it out of my social life.
Yeah,
it's not always easy because the divides are getting deeper and more prevalent all the time. But we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. I think that during the election cycles leading up to each American election, the MSN, they hype up the identity politics to get people foaming at the mouth. So we're kind of in the off season right now, but it's going to accelerate.
It's going to heat up very, very soon.
Yeah, and that's when I'm worried because I worry if it gets worse than it was last time around the time that Trump was actually elected. Here in Toronto, people were foaming at the mouth with ready to fight each other in the streets.
With the American election.
Yeah, but that's my whole point. Even in Canada, where we're not America, we can't even vote. But people in Toronto were still just watching the mainstream media and ready to fight in the streets.
My office downtown, Alex. The Trump Tower in Vancouver was built right opposite my office.
Oh, wow.
And there was a Vancouver counselor. His name's Kerry Jang. He went to my elementary school. He went to my high school. He's a little older than me. My sister knew him, and seems like a nice enough fellow. Seemed like a great guy. Again, a few years older than me. I didn't know him personally, but I know the name, and he's a Vancouver counselor. I think he still is. And he was lobbying at the time. This is like 2015, maybe 2016. Strip that tower of its name. We cannot have Trump Tower in Vancouver. And that was he felt it would better for him to apply his energies there than with running the city of Vancouver and making sure whatever his role in making sure Vancouver runs smoothly, he felt that was way more important for him to lobby aggressively to take the label of Trump Tower off Trump Tower. Just complete, asinine in my opinion.
Yeah, no,
but
absolutely.
For politicians to have views and have discussions like we're having, it's not possible in the current paradigm. Closest I guess we get is Bernier, right? I mean,
yeah. So here's an interesting thing about that. I don't know if you're probably not aware of this, but it turns out that I've interviewed some people who were kind of part of runnings for the PPC here in Ontario, and I've been, Freebird Media has supported all kinds of grassroots Canadian movements, and we've always supported Max by giving him media coverage and stuff like that, and we live streamed some of his speeches. But then we found out that
I've seen a lot of it. Yeah.
yeah, it turns out that some people within the PPC are telling they reprimanded one of their party members for associating with me when I was live streaming some Yellow Vest footage, and they also reprimanded Lee Stewart and some other people because they were afraid that people who were supporting Faith Goldie would look bad for the PPC. Now we're in a small group of people already opposing mass immigration and stuff, and I just don't think we have time to that really annoyed me about the PPC. Although they're
well, that's the cancer. That's the cancer, and that's the. I mean, it's very simple, Alex. It's like I can defeat anything you present to me by calling you the R word. Yeah. Once I call you the R word, if you're like any other Canadian, you will shrink away from the argument. You will either run in the other direction at 100 miles an hour, or vehemently deny but whatever was on the table for discussion is over. And that ultimately, I mean, that's why I don't have a lot of faith in Andrew Scheer, small conservative.
I have no interest in him.
When Bernier, I was kind of interested because he seemed to be a little bit of a vanguard, a little bit willing to take a few risks, a la Donald Trump. And then he went off on his own, and I thought, oh, geez. I mean, now we're just going to split the vote, and the grinning idiot is going to get another mandate, Trudeau. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm not super optimistic about who's going to win the next election. And again, I'm alluding to Faith Goldie's tweet. Ultimately, does it really matter? Ultimately, this is what one of the characters says in the book: is should Andrew Scheer be fortunate enough to stumble into the prime ministership? Because I don't consider him too strong a candidate. He seems like a very nice guy. But if he finds his way into the prime minister's office, God bless him. I think all that will happen is our descent into the gutter will slow down a little bit. Because right now it's pedal to the metal. It's pedal to the metal to let's bring them in, forget borders, welfare. Yeah, and we've got the CBC behind us, glossing over everything. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think, to tie back to your initial comment / question about between now and October. What are we, 6 months out from the election? It's going to get ratcheted up, and it's going to be interesting. One of the goals for my book was, to get it released before the election, and beat that by quite a bit, but to hopefully red pill a few Canadians along the way. To some of the issues, and I guess I'd rather go into the gutter slower than faster. So, with that said, I hope Trudeau doesn't find his way back in.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100% on your assessment of the major parties. I think it looks pretty bleak. I don't currently support any of the the major parties personally in terms of the PPC or the Liberals or the Conservatives or anything like that. I'm more now at this stage of the game concerned with moving the Overton window personally through my own platform and through fighting the culture war via art, like fiction, writing novels, and talking to other writers such as yourself. So I think people like you and I both are important in this kind of cultural pushback, because more than just who gets elected in the next election, it's how we start freely associating, what we start talking about, even in terms of culture, not just the political party. So I thank you for writing that. But I want to say to my audience as well that I read the book because you're fortunately you gave me an advanced copy. I can say from I genuinely really enjoyed reading it. I have a degree in English literature.
I should send you one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would love it. I mean, I can tell my viewers I really enjoyed reading it. It's very relatable. The characters are very realistic, and I think it will red pill a lot of people, especially even older people that don't really realize what's going on when they're walked through it in the way you kind of go through this guy's life in the book. I see it as an effective way through art and pop culture to start fighting back in the culture war. So I urge my viewers to pick up a copy. We'll have links in the description if you want to pick it up, which I encourage everyone to do. That's one way to fight the culture war. Another way is to support Freebird Media. Our Patreon account or PayPal links are in the description as well. And on that note, we actually have another super chat. We're getting some really good. Our conversation is generating some interest here in the chat. And Anaf Habib sends $20 this time and says, whites are constrained on talking about race and ethnicity because the globalists and demon worshippers want to deal the finishing blow to Christianity in Europe. The Enlightenment was a Trojan horse. This is the end game.
Mm.
So no question, just a comment. But what do you what are your thoughts on the idea that this basically is about globalists trying to do this by design? Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, a little spoiler alert, not for the current book, but my next book, still in the planning stages, but is going to be set in Ireland, and little tiny Ireland, 5 million people, 90% white at least now. I mean, you've probably seen the Molyneux video where they've got Project 2040 or something like that, where literally they want to bring in 1 million people. They believe that this little island can support 65 million people. I've got Irish roots. I've got Irish heritage. I've got relatives that are and friends that are in Ireland. They have no idea what's coming. They have no idea what's coming, and it started. It has started. So these are not accidental. No, there are some masters out there pulling strings and pushing the third. It all seems so evil, and these thoughts are explored in the book. Obviously, for me, it's a little above my pay grade because I don't understand it. I really don't. And again, I'm just a guy looking at things that are obvious. They're plain as day to anyone with two eyes to see, and I'm just describing it. Yeah, I've got a few characters that are kind of conspiracy theorists and come up with some crazy ideas, but ultimately I'm just saying, if we keep bringing in people that don't like Canada, that's probably not going to be good. Just a thought.
Absolutely.
But to comment for close out on the viewer's comment, it's there's no way this could all be happening at the same time to every single Western country through very similar dynamics, a little bit different flavor in each country. Some countries are ahead of others. Ireland happens to be very far behind, and the globalists have a particular zeal. I've been following a lot. Gemma O'Doherty. I don't know if you've ever heard that name. You got to follow her. She's on top of it. There's a few others, and they're waking up. But the masses, by the way, the masses are just a few million people compared to the billion in Africa.
Yeah.
Soon to be 4 billion. So people have to wake up. There was a tweet by Gemma O'Doherty today that said literally she feels they've got 5 years to save the country. If nothing changes in 5 years, it's all over for poor little Ireland. So I don't know why it's happening, but yeah, it's happening.
Very tragic. It is happening. I just shared an article today on Freebird Media. Today, I think Canada's immigration minister, who's Somalian, has a new plan to basically wants to bring in non-whites to rural areas to settle them in the farm areas. I'm from my home is in the heart of tobacco country, and I kind of want that to be my refuge from the city. I plan on leaving Toronto in the near future. I'm done with the city. I'm done with the culture. And I plan on moving home. And the last thing I want to do is end up with people who are encouraged to not like me in my tranquil little town that I grew up. We don't have crime. Well, the way I look at Toronto versus where I grew up is kind of it's kind of a cliche, but I do think a lot of Lord of the Rings, and I think of the Shire, and I live in Mordor, but I know there's a little place far away that's all happy, and the last thing I want to do is have the Shire get burned down for some goofy globalist agenda. So very, very
Can I make a point, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that is ultimately the essence of All Thy Sons. By the way, I hope you get the reference in the title, All Thy Sons.
I assume it was just to the.
Yeah. But I mean, there's sons in the book too, so it kind of plays out nice, and it's similar to some of my other books. But the theme is basically the premise is what happens when there are no more safe neighborhoods. No more safe cities, no more safe countries. So you're talking about going to a safe neighborhood out in, did you say tobacco country, wherever the heck that is? I assume somewhere in Ontario or
Norfolk County, Southern Ontario.
Sure. So that's your refuge. Well, ultimately, and ask a South African about this, by the way. There is no safe place that's not behind 12-foot walls with razor wire and electric current and armed guards and 24-hour surveillance. There is no safe place. Mm-hmm. And that's the premise of the book. And it sounds like hyperbole, and I guess to a certain degree maybe it is hyperbole in Canada because what did I say early on in our discussion? Vancouver's very safe. It's very multicultural, but it's very safe. I don't feel threatened when I walk through a mall and see like nothing, no other white faces or very few white faces. I don't feel, it's jarring a little bit. Just being honest, it's fine. I don't feel like anyone's going to attack me, but it's being whipped up. Identity politics, demonizing whites, and over time, that has a big impact.
Sure.
It has a big impact. It demoralizes whites. I saw a guy, Steve Saylor, a very smart guy. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he says whites are behaving more and more, not to disparage First Nations, but more and more like First Nations, as in chin a little bit on the ground, a little bit of a defeated people. I hate to disparage First Nations people because they're great, fantastic people, and in a lot of ways I admire them. I envy them too, and envy is not a really a nice trait, but I envy them in that they can be proud of their culture and they can say nice things about their culture. You and I cannot do that. That is against the rules.
Right.
But yeah, good luck to you. You'll probably be fine there for another 10, 20, 30 years in cottage country. And I hope your kids will, and your kids' kids, but who knows what the way things are going.
Here's one optimistic thought I have to say about the whole thing. I recently did a DNA test, and I find my own heritage fascinating. I'm 100%, Northwestern European, basically,
Mm-hmm.
the whitest guy you know. And so I was doing, but then I started doing streams about Saxon history because on my mother's side we're Saxons, and
Okay.
but we're by way of Transylvania. And so by studying the nation Saxon people, the Saxons were a nation of people from Germania, and then our ancestors moved into Transylvania, and then from there we came over to Canada. But we didn't have a state, but they were a group of people. And one thing I noticed is that over the last 17 centuries, we've been displaced several times and rebuilt rather quickly. And so, while a lot of whites, I think there's keep in mind, now we have large populations in general, like even 7 million people still, broadly speaking, a lot of people. So, while a lot of whites may have their chin on the ground, I also think there's something about being industrious and being survivors that's literally in our DNA. And I think that if things get bad enough, I think whites also have shown that we can survive in northern climates, we can survive in a lot of places, and we will, and we're naturally industrious and we build things. So, I think if no matter how bad things get, I think a lot of us, even if we get pushed north, we're problem solvers, or at least a fraction of our racial group is, and that group of people, like when things are really bad and the white liberalism can no longer act like an ostrich with its head in the sand and reality is in their face, then a fraction of us will come together, I think, out of pure necessity. And
I'd say that's true. I mean, what's interesting to me, again, to go to South Africa, is that the dire straits that whites are in. And if you don't believe it, you're not thinking straight. There are still those white liberals. They still have their head in the sand. A lot of it is driven by commerce too. Because if they are lucky enough to still have a decent paying job, the last thing they want to do is say anything controversial because to feed your family, you've got to be able to feed your family. You need a job, so you're not going to say anything that rocks the boat. As one of my South African friends said, and this comment stuck with me, is he does have a job, and he is very active, but in a discreet way, out of necessity. He says, when I'm at work, I know my place. And enough said. I mean, he is basically low man on the totem pole, and he works hard, does the job, and doesn't cause any stir, any fuss. And still he could be ousted at any time.
Yeah.
So that what you just described about the industrious nature, I mean, that's an end game, right? I mean, I don't know what happens between now and then. And I'm still a slight idealist. I grew up in a peaceful, multicultural society. I just think maybe if we kind of put the brakes on things for a while, let some assimilation, let some trust build. I'm naive in that sense. I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know. You tell me about Jane and Finch. If you went out there walking at midnight tonight, what would happen to you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't do that. I mean, I'm smart. That's called situational awareness, and like,
Yeah.
of course, I'm not welcome there. Which is why there are many places in this city where I wouldn't feel welcome to go. I just understand reality. That's just where certain demographic groups are. So I don't, all these other groups that constantly complain about minor little things that they feel intimidated about.
Yeah.
I'm like, do you not understand that this is just life for all of us? Like, we don't go into other people's neighborhoods in certain.
Yeah, no, they were microaggressed, and
Yeah.
probably they weren't even. Yet, a white person is beaten to a bloody pulp, and oh yeah, well, look at what his ancestors did. He deserved that.
Oh yeah, my God, the missing. I can't, even as a person who is traditionally educated in a Canadian system, it was only, and I'm in my 30s now. It was only in the last 2 years that I really got red pilled, and like I've been so miseducated in the
Did you say the
system.
last 2 years?
Yeah, like I was
Wow.
pretty naive until about, well, 2.5, say two, right? Like I started Freebird Media right around the time I got essentially red pilled in the course of about
Hmm.
2 or 3 months, and then started it out of like a sheer necessity at that point because it, like in Toronto, and a lot of here's the other thing that like things were just out of control, and but the thing I've also come to realize, or I can smell now, is that a lot of this is by design, like more than you'd think. Like politically speaking, like these left wing groups and stuff, they go out to and they agitate like and they're more
You do.
coordinated than you'd think. It's really really impressive actually,
Mm.
in that point. Um, there's things that white people are. Here's Have you ever heard of the book Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky?
Of course, yeah.
Right. So a lot of people, because he's considered one of the cultural Marxists, and that's considered like a playbook for the left, people are
Yeah.
hesitant to read it. But from our perspective as say whites in a dying civilization, people could learn a thing or two from those tactics. They can be utilized by us too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's one example I'll give you. Like people, and Alinsky brings this up really early on in the book. He goes, people don't have they don't want to rebel against something until you stimulate an appetite for rebellion. So you have to go,
Interesting.
like you have to go out and stimulate the people's attitude, their appetite. Sorry. So for us, for example, like we can be principled and we can say we're above on those immoral tactics, right? But if
Yeah.
people just are not stirred up right now, so if we like
No.
we have to talk tactics because if we're not going to go out and actually, I used to be personally very against being like a propagandist. I thought that was a dirty word, and I didn't want to be sensationalist or stir the boat or anything, and I still don't. But I am recognizing like if people like you and I don't sort of like rock the boat enough, there's just people,
Yeah.
the average person, there's no appetite for that rebellion, and if we don't rebel, we say within 5 years, countries like Ireland
Yeah.
and that they're done, right? So how do you feel about that?
Well,
Like,
I mean, I agree with you because think about hockey, and if you got two teams and one team doesn't play by the rules and the reffing is terrible, and I'll in this metaphor I'll call the media the ref, and two teams are one's not playing by the rules, one's tripping and hacking and punching and doing every dirty trick, they'll probably win. So
sure,
you're trying to
of
play
course,
by the rules at Freebird Media and tell the truth and tell a balanced approach. And first of all, it's not very sexy,
of course,
So you. I mean, for me, I can go with a little bit of hyperbole because I'm writing fiction. I'm writing fiction, and it's dystopian fiction, so I can explore a little bit. In the media, you're constrained theoretically by facts, but what did I say here? I mean, we're I didn't realize the power of propaganda until like the last 5 years. I used to read about it in
right,
textbooks and go, oh, yeah, and it would kind of register. But we're seeing it unfold in real time in our lifetimes, like with the anti-Trump movement, for example, or like the thing that really red pilled me is again to go back to my first book where I got into this, Johnny and Jamal, when I discovered Colin Flaherty and exposing this astronomical levels of black on white violence in American cities and towns everywhere. And so his tagline is basically, this is happening, and by the way, the media is not reporting it. And by the way, the media is reporting exactly the opposite. And I said, wow, that's right. That's right. And I used to do a lot of travel in the States through the 90s and into the mid 2000s. And I figured every little borough and town in the U.S. was a first world haven. I could wander about freely. I wandered into a few very difficult situations. I never got beat up, but I came close in places in Kansas City, Vegas once, Miami, and what's the other one? New Orleans. I've got 4 independent stories where and the media is not telling you this. It's not telling you this. And anyway, to get back to my point, is what else? I started to think, well, what else are they not telling us? What else are they not showing us? And then I finally come to the realization, they're not telling us anything. They're not telling us anything. They're a propaganda arm for whatever globalist movement, it's much, much worse than I thought. It's not just, this is a little awkward, let's gloss over the truth, let's use euphemisms. Maybe it started out that way, but now it's about completely suppressing any form of reality, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. So I'm just going to give myself one more quick little sales pitch, because there's very few people that will talk about the stuff that you and I talk about with our real faces and names and bluntly. And in Canada, we don't have a lot of homegrown media, but Freebird Media, we talk about it. We have already put ourselves out there. And the thing is, the media is so powerful. People really don't appreciate the power of propaganda. And right now, we're all subject to anti-white propaganda. If we don't band together somehow and with our own media, we're in trouble. And so I don't know where else to go, so I created Freebird Media. So anyone, if they appreciate these type of conversations, the article I shared by Maurice Porter recently with the race statistics, that kind of stuff, we go there, and people like yourself who write the fiction stuff, and the other part of our pop culture, you're the other arm of this culture war. So that's just my quick pitch again for both of us.
Yeah, I echo that. I say support Freebird Media, buy my book. Buy my books, leave reviews, tell your friends about Freebird Media. I mentioned that fellow in South Africa who he is a very secret activist, very, very smart guy, but at work he knows his place. And not only, he's jeopardizing life and limb, economic prosperity. We are still, free speech is, the Overton window is tiny, as you pointed out, but there's still a little bit of room, I'm weighing my words. Everything I've said to you, I'm weighing my words, and I'm cautious. But I also know that if I don't speak now, what's it going to be like in 5 years?
Absolutely.
And I'm speaking through my characters. So, gotta support Freebird Media.
I also think that, we
it's
are
now or never.
For sure, and I think by having these conversations like you and I are having, we do have effectiveness in moving the Overton window.
I hope so.
In the last 2 years, there's stuff that I talk about now pretty casually that I forget that it's even supposed to be taboo at this point.
Well, there's 2 things. One is hopefully we are pushing open that Overton window. Other forces, by the way, are acting to close it. So it's a dichotomy. But also, I don't know about you, Alex, but I sleep better at night.
Yeah, I sleep very well.
Because I'm not, a lot of my friends are they've got their head in the ground. There's no religion, there's no moral anchors in their life, and they love the Canucks. That's what they're passionate about. And if they're lucky, maybe they're passionate about their families, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. But the cohesion that groups of people have had in the past, we are lacking that, especially white Canadians. Unfortunately, there's no glue anymore.
Absolutely. It's a funny. I'm obviously a very pro-Western man. I love Western civilization, but it's a funny commentary, both the criticism the one criticism would be that so many people now live in this world where they can't express how they actually feel, or they're afraid to, right? Whereas I am. I might not be doing well financially, but I sleep so well at night because I feel fulfilled. I feel like I say what I want. I do something that gives me meaning, and there's something spiritually good about freeing yourself up when you actually come out of the closet and talk about this stuff. Because there have been other people that have been a part of Freebird Media that have kind of come out of the closet and then gone back into the closet.
I mentioned about how people kind of build themselves up, and it's not through spirituality. It's not through movements of like-minded people, and it's hopefully it's family, or following the New England Patriots or the Canucks or the Maple Leafs, and it's also just conspicuous spending. So maybe they've got a job, and by the way, they zip their lip when the company has a diversity of strength seminar at lunch, and by the way, attendance is mandatory, and that white male has to sit through that nonsense and nod his head and go, yeah, white people are evil. Yeah, we're bad. And my God, I hope I still have a job at the end of this. So they have to sit through that. And yeah, they make 100K or 200K or whatever, and they can consume in our society. But there's something very evil about that in my books.
Absolutely, it's so hollow. It's hollow, and that's the best word for it. There's no metaphysics at all in the West right now either. And so it's also not just about saving the West, but reinventing the West to a degree.
Maybe, yeah.
Because you're right. It's a pure consumer society.
Here, Alex. What are you doing?
Sorry, my computer battery's dying, so I'm just I got to move closer to I can plug it in before my computer dies. There we go. Sorry about that. We need to redefine the West too, because obviously it's become basically a consumer society at this point, where people kind of they just live to consume and compare. Everyone's looking at their neighbor.
I see Tucker Carlson getting on that high horse a little bit, and God bless him. He's saying a lot of great things. He's still very constrained. He still can't lay it all out, but it is nice to see him talking about issues like that.
I'll be honest with you. I was listening to him a lot last year, and then in the last 6 months or so, I've just almost stopped following all of the mainstream pundits, because even the mainstream is still kind of this controlled, like, for lack of a better word, like a loud opposition, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's definitely limits that even I don't believe that he could talk about the stuff we're talking about.
No, he couldn't. He absolutely couldn't, and he knows that. I heard him in one candid remark say something like, every single night he walks a fine line, and it could be all over for him at any moment, because he could step over the line. He said that. He said that on the air, and I thought, you know what?
I believe it.
It's not coincidence that I feel like, wow, he's pushing that Overton window. He's pushing that envelope. He is, and he's doing it, like we're talking a little bit further across the line. But like I said, I weigh my words, because I value my ability to earn a living. I value my ability to be safe and not persecuted by government, So I have a lot of respect for the institutions, even if they are being corrupt and ultimately will persecute me. So I'm going as far as I can without crossing any lines that I think are going to really hurt me. Yeah, and my characters go a little further. Put it that way. My characters go a little further, and they pay for it. But hey, that's their problem.
Yeah. But did you ever? By the way, this is just as kind of a side note, but there's a clip that was viral for a while on the internet of an Antifa rally in Portland, and this Antifa guy attacks this other guy. I guess he's a Proud Boy who's clearly jacked, and this guy's got a pipe, and he kind of comes at him. Did you ever see this? And then the other guy winds up and hits him so hard he just knocks him clean out.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, that. Oh my! These Antifa we're like delusional to think that they could fight.
I know. I mean, ultimately, I see these things propagating around where an Antifa guy takes a beating, and I don't really like the violence. One way, whichever direction it's going, there's still a certain measure of satisfaction there, I suppose. And I already talked about the one chapter where the Antifa guys do take a beating.
Yeah.
So maybe I secretly do appreciate it, but violence ultimately, it's just it's not a good thing.
Absolutely agree with you there. Just to clarify, I should clarify. I don't advocate violence. I didn't even mean to imply necessarily that to take satisfaction in the clip, so much as that the reason I'm so fascinated by these videos is that it shows you that they really are delusional. Like, they're not just talking.
No, I see your point.
When they attack these people, it shows that they think they can somehow actually fight these people. So they're not even in reality remotely.
Cognitive dissonance.
Right,
what the word is. I mean, they are so outside the realm of reality and so indoctrinated.
Beyond reasoning.
We see the sickness, in the stuff floating around on the internet. It's such garbage, and I try to stay away from that. Social media it's a bit of a cesspool.
It absolutely is. The thing is, so I've I stopped going down to like protests down at City Hall to try to get footage of Antifa violence and stuff because I've kind of matured beyond that. However, the reason I do still show that footage on my channel is because unless you either interact with these types yourself, like in person, like interact with an Antifa person, or you actually see the footage with your own eyeballs, you don't really register how ridiculous things are. You know what I mean? Like my parents generally they haven't seen it, so they don't really they haven't registered like how out of control these types. They sort of like here in Hamilton, actually in Hamilton there were last year some about 15 anarchists went down Locke Street and smashed out all the windows of the businesses and stuff. Not sure if you heard about the news, but they did eventually get arrested. But that was when Antifa first started to register on my parents' radar, because then they were starting to actually like get pretty violent at that part. But unless people kind of see with their own eyes the ridiculous radical left, and they don't really get the severity of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of it out there to be seen. But the fact that it's suppressed by the mainstream media, you know, you asked me about friends in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver area here, and one thing that shocks me is they've obviously been watching CNN, they've been watching CBC, they've been watching Global, the local Vancouver broadcasts, and everything that those news outlets do is slanted to be against the way you and I think, and against reality for that matter. And I mean, they are convinced that Trump colluded with Russia. Number one, they're convinced. And one guy, and I want to pin him down because this was 2 months ago, and I said, well, what if it comes out that they didn't collude? And he's going, oh, couldn't be. And I go, well, what if they did? How would you feel then? He goes, well, I'd feel kind of bad, like we wasted a lot of time and money. And I guarantee he's moved beyond that, and now it's like whatever the next thing is against Trump. So I forget what drove me down that path there, but we're in.
How bad it really is, and people don't often
realize.
That's
right. It's delusional, and that's people have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, and you can't even have a discussion. You can't even have an argument because they're working from a different set of axioms. And I'm a math guy. I'm a math major, by the way. I'm not a literature guy. I drifted into writing by accident. But you build up a mathematical system from a basic set of postulates or axioms, and they don't respect those. These are the things that are obvious. 2 + 2 = 4.
Well, that's very that's white masculinity right there.
It is.
You're oppressing them with your rationality.
They're building up a world based on 2 + 2 = 5. So
have you seen the quotes in the intersectionality textbooks where they specifically say like rationality is a white man's invention?
No.
Like we reject it flat out, full stop. Like that's not. I'm not like imposing that on them. They've said that, stated it. Like that's just one way of interpreting reality. So like you're people that like that. Like I'm trying to tell people, I was naive when I started Freebird because people like on the left, the radical, they're not even. You can't reason with them. You can't use logic to try to. You can't even appeal to them with empathy because they're still possessed like ideologically. And
then they bring the moral superiority to you too, and they start attacking you, and they're up on their high horse, and they're a good person, and boy oh boy,
oh sure,
you deserve to burn in hell.
And here's the other thing too, and I want to say this and be modest about how I say it, but like a lot of people on the left are doing is looking for an outlet for their resentment. At people that they're jealous of or that they perceive as having
resentment
more.
And envy. I used the word envy earlier. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
And so a lot of like me, for example, people see me and they just like without knowing my circumstances are like, well, he's a white male. He's probably got like from at least a middle class background, has a great life, and therefore he's a piece of shit. And like, there's no like I can't reason with them. They just
no because you have no basis to even be in the same room as them.
Yeah, exactly. And the weirdest thing is...
What's your problem showing up here with white skin, Alex? Get the fuck out. Sorry for my language. But that's ultimately what it is.
For sure, it is. And they'll literally do that. And the thing is, like, from there... Like, when I read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, it made a lot more sense to me because they understand that you can't really give someone... You got to go all out when you're demonizing people. If you want your tactics to be effective, you can't be like, well, he's 60% good and 40% bad. You got to pick what he is. And then, so for me, I just represent... the enemy. So they would if you pressed them on it, they would say, listen, you as an individual might be a good guy, but that isn't really the point because you're expendable essentially. Like you represent what is the enemy. So very frustrating.
Agreed, man.
So one final question that I want to ask you, because someone in the chat was asking about this, and they are a younger writer was asking, as someone from a younger writer's perspective, as someone who wants to talk about the things that you're talking about, dangerous subjects, what advice would you have for them in terms of either what to expect or how to go about it, maybe to try to be successful in writing about these dangerous topics?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if the question is how to go about actually writing a book, writing fiction, or how to actually write fiction in the genre that I've selected, which I don't even know what it's called, reality-based fiction from a conservative standpoint. I do consider my books red pills for liberals, somewhat black pills, but I also consider them comfort food for conservatives to show other conservatives, by the way, you're not living. You are being gaslit. This is not reality. What you're seeing, this is reality. So I mean, a younger writer, I'm 53 years old. I'm at least 20 years older than you, and I've been trying to be a writer since 1991, about 1990. So I mean, you got to learn the craft. And I wrote a lot of short stories in writing groups for years and years and years and years. All the while, I was also a software developer. That is my profession, and which, by the way, helped me to organize a large ecosystem, which is a novel, which can be 100,000 words or more. Like my Never, Never, Never Games, 100. I think the first draft was 150,000 words. So yeah, I mean. The advice is always, you got to read and you got to write. I still stole that from Stephen King. If you want to be a good writer, you got to read, and you got to write. And then ultimately, I'm not writing these books because I think they'll sell. I'm writing because this is Toni Morrison, actually a black writer. I haven't read her. Here she's a good writer. But she said if you can't find the book you want to read, you must write it yourself. And that's kind of something I've taken to heart, because I have a lot of writers I really enjoy, but no one's writing this stuff. Tom Wolfe, are you familiar with Tom Wolfe?
Sure, yeah, electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Oh, you picked the most obscure one. Have you read Bonfire of the Vanities?
No, but I know about it, but I never actually read it.
Published in '87. Prescient, is that the right word? Prescient, yes. And then A Man in Full in 2000. He passed away like about a year ago, but he absolutely phenomenal in discussing race and in America. But yeah, so just to close out, write, read, and pursue what's in your heart, and tell the truth. Maybe if you want to make money, maybe look more to the genres and play the game a little more. But like you said, like I said, we sleep better at night being true to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On that note, I just want to say again, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's refreshing to talk to someone else who's willing to be real like this. So thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate it.
And I just want to tell my viewers, I have read the book. I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart, it's a very enjoyable, entertaining book. It's got a creepy kind of Stephen King kind of tone, but it's very much realistic. And, I can't recommend it enough. So please consider, getting a copy, supporting us in the culture war. Also, if you enjoy this type of interview, support Freebird Media. But on that note, we've been talking a long time. We've hit on some really good points, so I think now's a good time to kind of wrap it up. But it's always a pleasure. I hope to speak to you again in the future, and good luck with the book.
Sounds good, Alex. I appreciate it. Appreciate what you do at Freebird Media, and we'll talk again soon. Take care, my friend.
Awesome. You as well. Have a good night.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.